3:07 in the morning. That was the exact time glowing on my phone when the pounding started. Not knocking. Not polite tapping. Pounding. Hard. Urgent blows that rattled through my front door and echoed down the silent hallway like something trying to break its way into my life. For a second, I lay frozen in bed. My breath caught halfway in my chest. The house felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that creeps under your skin and makes every sound feel sharper. Another round of pounding hit the door, faster this time. More desperate, and my heart began hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Nobody knocked like that at 3 a.m. Nobody good. Anyway, I slid out of bed slowly, my bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. Every step down the hallway felt heavier than the last. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want whoever was outside to know I was awake. When I reached the door, I leaned forward and pressed my eye against the peephole. And that's when I saw him. Mr. Dawson. He stood on my porch, still wearing his boots, his jacket half buttoned like he had thrown it on in a hurry. His chest rose and fell in sharp breaths, and he kept glancing over his shoulder toward the street like he expected something to come racing around the corner at any second. I unlocked the door before I even realized what I was doing. The moment it cracked open, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't open your door tonight," he said. "No matter who it is." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was tight. Controlled. The kind of voice people use when they're afraid of being overheard. I blinked at him. Still half asleep, but suddenly wide awake inside. "What's going on?" I whispered. "Mr." Dawson didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned slightly past me, looking into the shadows of my living room like he was checking to make sure I was alone. Then he turned his head and scanned the street again. When he spoke, his voice dropped even lower. "You'll understand before sunrise." Before I could ask another question, he stepped back from the door. And what unsettled me most wasn't that he left. It was that he didn't go inside his house. He walked past it, slowly, like he was keeping watch. I stood there in the doorway for several seconds after he disappeared down the street, my hand still gripping the edge of the door. The neighborhood looked exactly the way it always did, quiet, dark, peaceful, but something inside me had shifted. Something invisible had moved into place. I closed the door and locked it. Twice. Back in my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed instead of lying down. Sleep wasn't coming back, not after that. The silence in the house felt heavier now, thick enough to press against my ears. I had only lived in this neighborhood for a few months, ever since moving here after Daniel died. The quiet streets had been one of the reasons I chose this place. Quiet meant safe. Quiet meant predictable. But tonight, quiet felt like something else entirely. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and stared at the screen, not even sure what I was looking for. That's when I noticed the unread email sitting at the top of my inbox. From my attorney. Subject line: regarding final property transfer. I stared at it for a long moment but didn't open it. Not yet. I didn't have the energy to deal with paperwork at 3 a.m. Instead, I set the phone down and listened. That's when I heard it. A vehicle. Slow. Moving carefully down the street outside my house. I slid off the bed and walked quietly toward the window, pulling the edge of the curtain back just enough to see through the narrow gap. A dark SUV rolled past my house at a pace that made my stomach tighten. Too slow to be normal. Too deliberate to be random. The headlights stayed steady as it crept forward, then paused briefly near the corner before continuing out of view. I let the curtain fall back into place. This neighborhood was supposed to be safe, I whispered to myself, but the words sounded weak in the stillness. I stayed near the window for a long time after that, arms wrapped around myself, waiting for another sound, waiting for something to confirm that I wasn't imagining things. Minutes passed. Then more. Eventually, the sky outside began to lighten just enough to soften the darkness. Dawn was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. That's when the doorbell rang. Not pounding this time. Not urgent. Just one long, steady press. The sound sliced clean through the silence of the house. I froze where I stood, My chest tightened as I forced myself to move back toward the door. Every step felt slower than the last, like walking through thick water. When I reached the door, I leaned forward again and looked through the peephole. A man stood on my porch. He wore a utility uniform and held a clipboard against his chest. His posture was too straight, too still, like he had been waiting there for a while. I glanced past him, scanning the street. No truck, no equipment, nothing, just him, as if he felt my gaze. The man lifted his head slightly and looked straight at the peephole. Directly at me. A chill slid down my spine. "Water service emergency," he called through the door. His voice carried a forced confidence that didn't match the situation. "We need to check your system immediately." My fingers hovered near the lock. Then Mr. Dawson's voice echoed in my head. "Don't open your door tonight, no matter who it is." I stepped back instead of forward. I didn't request service. I called through the door, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other side. Then I heard his footsteps shift slightly. "You need to open the door, ma'am," he said, more firmly now. Silence followed, long enough to make my pulse race again. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. I heard the faint sound of someone walking down the steps, followed by the quiet crunch of gravel beneath shoes. I waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Only when the silence felt complete did I unlock the door just enough to open it a few inches. Cool morning air drifted inside. I looked down instinctively, and that's when I saw it. A chalk mark, drawn near the bottom corner of my front door. Simple, small, but deliberate. I stared at it, my heart pounding harder than it had all night. I didn't know what the mark meant yet, but something deep inside me whispered the truth before my mind could catch up. They weren't finished with me. They were coming back. I crouched down slowly, staring at the chalk mark like it might suddenly move if I blinked. It was smaller than my palm, drawn low enough that most people would never notice it unless they were looking for something wrong. The lines were simple, 2 short strokes crossing at an angle, but the chalk dust still clung to the edges, loose and fresh. Whoever made it had done it only minutes ago. My fingers hovered just above it, not touching, as if the symbol itself carried danger. A cold realization settled into my stomach. He hadn't just come to my door. He had marked it. I straightened slowly and lifted my head, scanning the quiet street in front of me. Morning light had begun creeping across the pavement, pale and weak, revealing rows of houses that suddenly didn't feel as safe as they had yesterday. That's when I saw movement. Across the street, a curtain shifted slightly, just enough to catch my attention. I froze. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing behind the glass, but then the curtain settled back into place, and the window looked empty again. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe, but nothing about this morning felt like nothing. I stepped back inside quickly and shut the door, locking it again. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my phone. Mr. Dawson. He would know what this meant. I tapped his name and pressed call, holding the phone tight against my ear while it rang. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. That wasn't like him. Mr. Dawson was the kind of man who answered calls before the second ring, especially after showing up at my door in the middle of the night with a warning that still echoed in my head. I hung up and walked to the window overlooking his house. His porch light was off. Yesterday. It had been on all night. I frowned, stepping closer to the glass. His truck was gone. The driveway sat empty, the space where his vehicle should have been looking strangely exposed. A knot tightened in my chest. Why would he warn me, then leave? The silence outside stretched longer than it should have, pressing against the windows like something waiting. Then the knocking came back. Not pounding this time. Slow. Measured. Each knock spaced evenly. Deliberate. Patient. More threatening than before. I froze halfway between the window and the door. "Ma'am." The same voice called from outside. Calm. Controlled. "We still need access." He hadn't left. He had stayed nearby, waiting. My pulse quickened as I moved toward the door again, forcing myself to stay quiet. I leaned forward carefully and looked through the peephole. He stood closer this time. Too close. The clipboard was raised higher now, almost like he was trying to block my view of his body. His uniform still looked official at first glance, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. No truck, no tools, nothing that matched his story. Water contamination risk, he said loudly. We need to inspect immediately. The words sounded rehearsed, polished, practiced, authority wrapped in urgency. I swallowed hard and stepped back slightly, keeping my voice low but firm. I didn't request service. There was a pause. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. He smiled. Not wide, not friendly, just enough to feel wrong. Ms. Evelyn Carter, he said slowly. Clearly, we already have authorization. My heart slammed against my ribs. He knew my name, my full name. The air around me suddenly felt thinner, harder to breathe through. My fingers tightened around my phone as I stepped farther back from the door. Someone had given him that information. Someone had shared it. This wasn't random. This was targeted. I backed into the hallway, my mind racing faster than my thoughts could form. There was only one person I trusted enough to call right now. Lucas. I tapped his name and pressed call, pressing the phone tight against my ear. Ring. 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 No answer. My chest tightened as I tried again. Still nothing. A flicker of panic rose inside me, sharp and sudden. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. A message. From Lucas. Stay inside. Don't trust anyone. I stared at the screen, my breath catching. Relief hit first. He had responded. But the relief faded almost immediately, replaced by something heavier. How did he know? How did he know something was wrong? I hadn't told him anything yet. A loud knock slammed against the door again. Harder this time, rattling the frame. If you don't open this door, the man called sharply, you could be responsible for damages. His tone had changed. Less polite, more forceful. A sharp scraping sound followed. Metal against metal. My blood ran cold. He was testing the handle. Not hiding it. Not pretending anymore. I stepped back quickly, nearly dropping my phone as my breath came in shallow bursts. This wasn't an inspection. This was intrusion. A movement alert suddenly flashed across my phone screen. Security camera notification. Movement detected. Outside. My hands shook as I opened the app and pulled up the recording from earlier. The footage loaded slowly, the spinning circle feeling like torture. Then the video appeared. I watched the moment the chalk mark had been drawn. The man crouched low near the door, moving quickly. But he wasn't alone. Another figure stood near the sidewalk, half hidden in shadow, watching, waiting. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting. The second figure shifted slightly, stepping into the faint morning light for only a second, just long enough to leave a shape in my mind. Something about the posture felt familiar. Too familiar. The footage ended as the figure moved away, climbing into a vehicle parked at the curb. A dark SUV, the same one I had seen earlier. My breath caught as I replayed the clip, this time focusing on the vehicle. Frame by frame. Slower. Closer. The license plate came into view briefly before the car moved out of frame. Only part of it was visible. Just the first few characters. But it was enough. Because I had seen those letters before. On Lucas's car. No, I whispered under my breath. That couldn't be right. It had to be coincidence. It had to, but doubt had already taken root. Silence returned outside. No knocking. No footsteps. Nothing. For a moment, the house felt still again, but not safe. Never safe. My phone buzzed once more in my hand. Another message from Lucas. We need to talk, but not at your house. I stared at the words, a chill spreading slowly through my chest. I didn't know yet whether Lucas was trying to protect me, or whether he was the reason I needed protection at all. I read Lucas's message again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less frightening. "We need to talk. But not at your house." My thumb hovered over the screen before I finally typed back. "Where are you?" I watched the message send. The small word delivered appeared beneath it almost instantly. And then nothing. No typing bubbles. No reply. Just silence. The kind of silence that grows heavier the longer it lasts. I stood in the middle of my hallway, the phone still in my hand, staring at the chalk mark on the door like it was daring me to understand it. Morning light had begun to spill across the floor, pale and cold. Outside, the neighborhood looked normal again, too normal. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance. A garbage truck rumbled faintly down the street a few blocks away. But inside me, nothing felt normal anymore. I needed answers. And the only person who might have them lived right next door. I grabbed my sweater from the back of a chair and slipped it on, my hand still trembling slightly. After unlocking the door carefully, I stepped outside, glancing left and right before closing it behind me. The chalk mark stayed there on the door, faint but impossible to ignore. I walked across the short strip of grass separating my house from Mr. Dawson's and knocked firmly on his door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. That's when I noticed his mailbox. Closed. Untouched. The newspaper sat neatly folded at the edge of his driveway, exactly where it had been tossed hours earlier. Mr. Dawson never left his paper outside. Not once since I'd moved here. A ripple of unease slid through my chest. Where was he? I turned to leave, unsure of what to do next, when the low rumble of an engine reached my ears. I spun around just in time to see Mr. Dawson's truck turning into the driveway. Relief washed over me so suddenly it almost made my knees weak. He parked quickly and stepped out, his expression tight the moment he saw me standing there. "You all right?" he asked, walking toward me. I didn't waste time answering. Instead, I held up my phone and showed him the photo I had taken of the chalk mark. His reaction was immediate. His jaw tightened. His eyes sharpened in a way I had never seen before. "That mark," he said quietly, "means your house was chosen." Chosen. The word settled into my chest like a stone. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He exhaled slowly, glancing down the street before answering. "Groups use marks like that," he said. "They watch neighborhoods. They look for people who just moved in, people living alone, people who suddenly come into money." The last part made my stomach twist. "Money," I repeated. He looked at me carefully. "Who knows about your inheritance?" The question landed harder than I expected, because suddenly, my mind jumped backward in time. 3 weeks earlier, I could see it clearly now, sitting in the leather chair across from my attorney's desk, the smell of polished wood filling the office while sunlight filtered through tall windows behind him. "You should understand," he had said calmly, sliding documents across the desk. "Your aunt left you significant assets, investment accounts, land holdings, things I barely understood at the time." I remembered laughing nervously, overwhelmed but not afraid. "Are you saying this is a lot?" I had asked. He gave a small smile. "Yes," he replied. "And sometimes, inheritance changes how people see you." At the time, I thought he meant distant relatives or strangers. Now, the words felt like a warning I had missed. Another memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about until now. "Has anyone pressured you to sign documents recently?" the attorney had asked before I left. "No," I had said without hesitation. But standing in my driveway now, that answer didn't feel so certain anymore. I returned to my house quickly, my pulse picking up with each step. Mr. Dawson followed silently behind me as I walked straight to the desk in my living room. The drawer slid open with a soft scrape. Inside sat the stack of property papers I had received weeks ago. I pulled them out, spreading them across the table under the growing light of morning. One by one, I flipped through the pages, page after page of legal language, dates, signatures, numbers. At first, everything looked normal, until it didn't. One document caught my attention, a form I barely remembered seeing before. I leaned closer, studied the signature at the bottom. My name, written in dark ink. But something about it felt wrong. Too smooth. Too perfect. I grabbed another document I knew I had signed personally and placed them side by side. The difference was subtle, but undeniable. My chest tightened as realization struck. I didn't remember signing this. Not this form. Not this authorization. Cold fear crawled through my veins as the truth began forming in my mind. Someone had signed this. Someone had done it in my name. My thoughts raced backward, searching through recent memories until one moment stood out above the rest. Lucas, sitting at my kitchen table just days earlier, flipping through paperwork with careful attention. "You don't need to worry about this stuff," he had said gently. "You've been through enough." I remembered leaving the room briefly to answer a phone call, leaving him alone with the documents, trusting him completely. Now that memory felt dangerous, like a trap I had walked into willingly. A sudden ringing sound shattered the silence. My phone lit up in my hand. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Silence. No breathing. No voice. Then a soft click. The call ended. A chill spread through my body. Seconds later, my phone buzzed again. Security alert. Movement detected. Outside. I opened the camera feed quickly. The dark SUV rolled slowly past my house once more. Same pace. Same deliberate movement. Not hiding. Not rushing. Watching. I paused the footage and zoomed in on the driver's side. The image blurred slightly as I enlarged it, but the silhouette inside became clearer. Shoulders slightly hunched. Head tilted forward. A posture I had seen countless times before. I replayed the clip again, focusing on the license plate as it passed through the frame. Only part of it was visible, just enough to recognize. The first 3 characters matched Lucas's plate exactly. My breath caught in my throat. "No," I whispered again, though the words sounded weaker this time, as if my own voice didn't believe it anymore. My phone buzzed once more. An email notification appeared on the screen. From my attorney. Subject line: Urgent. Property access activity detected. My hands trembled as I opened it. The message was short. Clear. Devastating. Someone had attempted to access my property records using verified credentials. Credentials registered under one name: Lucas Carter. I stared at the screen, the words blurring slightly as my vision tightened. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, anything. But deep down, something inside me had already begun to accept the truth. This wasn't just about strangers outside my door. This was about someone much closer, someone I had trusted my entire life. I read the email again, slower this time, forcing myself to absorb every word instead of skimming in disbelief. Unauthorized property access detected. Lucas Carter, credentials used. My hand stayed frozen around the phone as I reread the timestamp beneath the message. 30 minutes ago. 30 minutes. That meant while I had been standing in my hallway, staring at that chalk mark, someone had been trying to take control of my property. Not hours earlier. Not days ago. Right then, my knees felt weak, and I lowered myself into the nearest chair before I dropped to the floor entirely. The kitchen around me felt too bright now, sunlight spilling across the counter like nothing had changed. But everything had. I pressed the call button beside my attorney's name before I could think myself out of it. He answered after only one ring. "Evelyn," he said, voice sharp but controlled. "I was about to call you." "I got your email," I whispered, my voice thinner than I intended. What does this mean? There was a pause on the other end. Papers shifting faintly. "It means someone attempted to access your ownership controls," he said carefully. "Not just view records, initiate authorization." The words hit harder than I expected. Authorization for what? For property transfer procedures. My breath caught in my throat. Transfer. The word felt heavy and final. If that request had gone through, he continued, voice tightening slightly, you could have lost legal control of the property. The room tilted slightly as his words settled into place. Lost control. Lost everything. I gripped the edge of the table with my free hand, trying to steady myself. "Can you stop it?" I asked quickly. "Yes," he said. "We're initiating a temporary freeze immediately. No transactions can move forward without direct confirmation from you." Relief flickered, but it didn't last long. Because the next question formed before I could stop it. "How did they even get access?" I asked. Silence followed. "Not long, but long enough. Have you authorized anyone to act on your behalf recently?" he asked. Authorized. The word dragged me straight back to the documents spread across my table. My eyes shifted toward them automatically. I don't think so," I said slowly. "Check your paperwork carefully," he replied. "If there's a representative clause in place, that person may have attempted access." Representative clause. The words echoed in my mind as the call ended. I turned slowly toward the stack of documents and slid them closer across the table. My hands felt steadier now, not calmer. Just more focused, one by one. I flipped through the pages, carefully, slowly, looking for something I had missed before. The sunlight streamed across the paper, highlighting the edges of ink and signature lines. I placed two forms side by side again, one I clearly remembered signing, and the one that had caught my attention earlier. The difference stood out more now. My signature always had a slight upward curve at the end of the last letter. This one didn't. It stopped too cleanly. Too perfectly. My pulse quickened as I flipped to the top of the document and read the heading more carefully this time. Temporary administrative authorization. My breath caught. Administrative authority meant someone could act in my place. Approve actions. Sign documents. Move assets. Without needing me physically present. Cold dread settled into my chest. Someone hadn't just forged my signature. They had created authority. My mind began piecing together memories I had pushed aside earlier. Lucas sitting at my kitchen table. Lucas flipping through paperwork. Lucas smiling reassuringly. "You don't have to worry about this stuff anymore," he had said gently. "I'll take care of it." I remembered how tired I had been that day. How grateful I felt to have someone help carry the weight of paperwork and legal confusion after Daniel's death. I remembered leaving him alone in the room for several minutes, trusting him completely. That memory didn't feel comforting anymore. It felt dangerous. A sharp sound from outside pulled me from my thoughts. A vehicle. Slow. Moving past the house. My head snapped toward the window. I stood carefully and stepped closer, pulling the curtain back just enough to see through the narrow gap. The same dark SUV rolled past again. Slower than before. Almost crawling. My stomach tightened. This wasn't coincidence. This was observation. Surveillance. The vehicle paused briefly near the end of the street before moving forward again. As it passed, I noticed the passenger side window slightly lowered. Someone inside lifted what looked like a phone, pointed toward my house. Recording. The realization hit like ice water down my spine. They weren't just watching, they were documenting. My phone buzzed sharply in my hand, making me jump. Another email. From my attorney. Subject line. Document verification requested. I opened it immediately. Attached was a scanned copy of the authorization form, the same one lying in front of me. But this version included something I hadn't noticed before. A section near the bottom. Printed clearly. Authorized representative. Lucas Carter. The name stared back at me like something alive. My brother's name. Not hidden. Not disguised. Official. Registered. My chest tightened painfully as anger began replacing fear. He didn't just sign something. He registered himself. As if he had every right. As if my trust had been permission. My phone vibrated again before I could fully process the thought. A message from Lucas. "We need to meet." I stared at the words, my pulse beating harder with every second. Then another message followed. "Don't involve anyone else." My breath caught. Isolation. Control. That's what he wanted. I lowered the phone slowly and picked up the document again. Flipping to the final page, something caught my eye. A line buried deep in the legal language. Small print, easy to overlook. I leaned closer and read it carefully. Authorized representative may approve property transfer without direct owner presence. My throat tightened. That meant he didn't just have access. He had power. Enough power to move assets, sell property, take everything, without me ever stepping into the room. Denial shattered completely in that moment. I sat there in silence, staring at the paper, feeling something inside me shift in a way I couldn't undo. I didn't know yet how far Lucas had gone. But for the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own brother. I sat there staring at the clause until the words blurred together, my hands resting flat against the paper like it might fly away if I lifted them. Authorized representative may approve property transfer without direct owner presence. Lucas hadn't just made a mistake. He had built a system that could move everything I owned without me ever knowing until it was too late. The realization didn't feel like panic anymore. It felt sharper than that. Colder. Focused. Fear slowly gave way to something else. Anger. Not loud anger. Not explosive. Quiet anger, the kind that makes your mind clear instead of cloudy. I reached for my phone and called my attorney again. He answered immediately. I found the clause, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Temporary administrative authority. Under Lucas's name. There was no surprise in his silence. Only confirmation. We anticipated that possibility, he said. We've already initiated an emergency freeze on your accounts and property access. A breath I didn't realize I was holding finally released from my lungs. Is that enough? I asked. For now, he replied. But if someone submitted forged authorization already, they may attempt a full transfer soon. That's why we need to move quickly. Move quickly. Time suddenly felt like the enemy. What should I do next? I asked. You need to report this, he said firmly. This is no longer just a civil matter. It may be criminal fraud. The word fraud landed heavily in my chest. Criminal. That meant this wasn't just betrayal. It was a crime. I hesitated for only a second before dialing the number for the local police station. My fingers trembled slightly. But not from fear anymore, from adrenaline. A woman answered calmly. Police department. How can I assist you? I swallowed once before speaking. I think someone is trying to transfer my property without permission, I said. And I believe it involves forged documents. Her tone shifted immediately, sharper, more alert. Have you authorized anyone to act on your behalf? She asked. The question struck harder than expected, because answering it meant saying his name out loud. Yes, I said quietly. My brother had access to my documents. There was a brief pause on the line. Has he attempted financial activity recently? She asked. Yes, I said. This morning. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, like I was hearing someone else speak. The officer explained that similar reports had surfaced in recent weeks, cases involving forged authority, fake service workers, and suspicious vehicles targeting individuals who had recently inherited assets. A pattern, not coincidence, not random. I wasn't alone in this. That realization was terrifying and strangely grounding at the same time. Before I could process it fully, a knock sounded at my front door. Sharp. Familiar. My chest tightened as I moved cautiously toward the entryway. I looked through the peephole. Mr. Dawson stood outside. Relief flickered through me. I unlocked the door carefully and let him in. You all right? He asked immediately, scanning my face. Not really, I admitted. He nodded slowly, like he had expected that answer. I drove around the neighborhood earlier, he said. Wanted to see if anything looked off. My stomach tightened. And I asked. He hesitated briefly before answering. I saw that same SUV again. A chill slid down my spine. Where? I asked. 2 streets over, he said. Parked behind the corner grocery store. He shifted his weight slightly, his expression growing more serious. And I saw someone meeting with the driver. My chest tightened painfully. Who? I whispered. He looked directly at me before speaking. I think it was Lucas. The words hit like a physical blow. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Just stared at him as the truth settled deeper into my chest. Denial had been fading all morning. Now it was gone. Completely gone. After Mr. Dawson left to check on something outside, I sank slowly into the chair near the window, staring at nothing. The house felt too quiet, too still. Lucas had always been the one I trusted most. After Daniel died, he had stepped in without hesitation. He helped me sort paperwork, made phone calls, stayed late into the night when grief made sleep impossible. He had been my support, my safety. Now those memories felt twisted, distorted. Not kindness. Opportunity. A slow, painful realization formed inside my mind. Lucas didn't just want money. He wanted control. Control over the property. Control over decisions. Control over me. My phone buzzed in my hand, snapping me back to the present. Another camera notification. Movement detected. I opened the app quickly. The SUV appeared again on the screen, moving slowly past my house at nearly the same time it had earlier. Same path. Same speed. Same patience. Not random. Routine. Predictable. I replayed the footage and began writing notes on a piece of paper nearby. Time. Direction. Speed. Details I would have ignored hours ago now felt important. Evidence. That word echoed in my mind. Evidence meant power. Power meant protection. And protection meant survival. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. From Lucas. Meet me at noon. Short. Direct? No explanation. A second message followed seconds later. Come alone. The words felt heavier than they should have. Not a request. An instruction. Isolation. Control again. I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking the phone. Then I stood. Walked to the front door. Grabbed my keys. I gathered the documents from the table and placed them carefully into a folder, sliding it into my bag. Outside. The air felt warmer now, brighter than it had been hours earlier. But the tension remained. As I stepped toward my car, something caught my eye. 2 houses down, parked at the curb. The dark SUV, engine running, watching, waiting. For the first time since that knock at 3 a.m, I didn't feel like I was running from danger anymore. I was walking straight toward it. I kept my eyes forward as I unlocked my car, but I could feel the SUV behind me without even turning around. The moment I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, headlights flickered on in my rearview mirror. Watching, waiting, following. My pulse quickened, but my hand stayed steady on the steering wheel. I backed slowly out of the driveway, pretending not to notice the vehicle behind me. Then I drove. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Toward the diner Lucas had chosen. The drive felt longer than it should have. Every turn heavy with tension. I checked my mirrors more than once, and each time, the SUV remained there, far enough to seem casual, close enough to feel deliberate. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted me to know. When the diner finally came into view, relief didn't come with it. Only pressure. The building sat along the side of the road, its faded sign buzzing faintly overhead. A handful of cars occupied the parking lot. But the place looked quiet, too quiet for late morning. Lucas's car was already there, parked near the entrance, engine off, waiting. He had arrived early. Of course he had. I parked slowly, forcing myself to breathe before stepping out of the car. The SUV rolled past the diner without stopping, disappearing briefly down the road. But I knew it wasn't gone. Not really. Inside, the smell of coffee and fried food hit me instantly. The soft hum of conversation drifted through the room, but I barely noticed it. Because I saw him, Lucas sat alone at a booth near the window, hands clasped tightly together on the table, back rigid. Not relaxed, not calm. The moment I stepped inside, he looked up. Then, strangely, he looked away. Lucas had never avoided eye contact with me before. Not once in our entire lives. That small movement unsettled me more than anything else. I walked slowly across the diner and slid into the seat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything that had already happened and everything still waiting to unfold. "I'm glad you came," Lucas said finally. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. Like something practiced in advance. I studied his face carefully. His jaw looked tighter than usual. His fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the table, betraying nervous energy he couldn't fully hide. "Why did you tell me not to trust anyone?" I asked quietly. He leaned back slightly, forcing a breath. "I've been trying to protect you," he said. Protect me. The word sat wrong in my chest. "There's been suspicious activity," he continued. "People targeting properties. I heard about it and started making moves to secure your assets." His explanation sounded logical on the surface. Too logical. Too smooth. "I had to act fast," he added, "before someone else took control." I watched him closely, listening not just to his words but to the spaces between them. Something didn't fit. "How did you know about the forged access attempt?" I asked. The question landed harder than I expected. Lucas paused, just long enough to notice. His eyes shifted briefly to the side before returning to mine. "I got alerts," he said. But the answer felt incomplete and wrong. Because the timeline didn't match. He had warned me before the attorney ever contacted me, before any alerts had been sent. "You got alerts?" I repeated carefully. "Yes," he said quickly. Too quickly. The inconsistency settled into place like a missing puzzle piece finally clicking. He was lying. I reached into my bag slowly and pulled out the folder. The papers slid across the table toward him. He didn't touch them at first, just stared. His face changed almost instantly, the tension tightening around his eyes, his mouth flattening into something unreadable. "You authorized this?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Lucas didn't deny it, didn't protest. Instead, he leaned forward slightly and studied the signature in silence. Too calm, too deliberate. "I was trying to help you," he said finally. "Not denial, just justification." My chest tightened painfully. "Help me," I repeated. "You weren't ready to handle this kind of money," he said, his voice sharpening slightly. "You were overwhelmed, grieving, vulnerable." The words struck deep, not because they were loud, but because they carried judgment. "I stepped in to protect the assets," he continued. "Someone had to protect, control." The difference between those words suddenly felt enormous. "You gave yourself authority," I said quietly. Lucas exhaled sharply. "I made arrangements," he corrected, "with people who understand how this works. People, plural. That word hit harder than anything else." "You involved others?" I asked. His silence answered before his words did. "Yes," he admitted. My chest tightened again, but this time with something colder than fear. Understanding. I glanced toward the diner window, and there it was. The SUV, parked across the street. Driver inside. Watching. Waiting. They hadn't left. They had never intended to. This meeting wasn't private. It was planned. Controlled. A trap. Lucas followed my gaze and stiffened slightly. "You shouldn't be looking at them," he muttered under his breath. "Them? Not coincidence. Not strangers. Connected." "Lucas," I said quietly, forcing him to look at me again. His composure cracked slightly. "You never understood what that money meant," he said suddenly, frustration rising into his voice. "You never saw what it could become." Resentment. That's what filled his tone now. Not concern. Not protection. Jealousy. Something deeper. Something older. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed sharply in my hand. I glanced down. A message from my attorney. Urgent. Someone just attempted final transfer authorization. My breath caught in my throat. Even now, While we sat here, they were still trying. I looked back up at Lucas slowly, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across his face. Real fear. The kind that comes when a plan begins to collapse. I walked into that diner hoping for answers. But sitting there across from him, with the SUV waiting outside and the transfer attempt happening in real time, I realized the real danger had never been outside my door. It had been sitting across from me all along. I stared at the message on my phone, the words burning into my vision. Someone just attempted final transfer authorization. My fingers tightened around the device as I lifted my eyes slowly back to Lucas. He was already watching me, too closely, too intensely. "What does it say?" he asked. Not casually, not curiously, urgently, like he already knew the answer and just needed confirmation. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, watching the tension build in his face. "Someone just tried to take my property," I said finally. Lucas froze. Only for a second. But it was enough. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flickered downward before snapping back to mine. Then he reached for his phone on the table. Too fast. Too deliberate. That movement confirmed everything. "You already knew," I whispered. He didn't answer. Outside, a distant sound began to rise. Sirens. Faint at first. Barely noticeable beneath the low hum of the diner, but growing louder with every passing second. Lucas heard them too. His head turned sharply toward the window. Across the street, the SUV suddenly came to life. Its engine roared, headlights flashing as the driver attempted to pull away from the curb. The sound of sirens grew louder. Closer. Too close. Lucas pushed back from the booth suddenly, standing so fast the chair scraped loudly across the tile floor. "You forced this," he snapped, his voice sharp now. "You didn't listen. You never listen." The accusation stunned me. "Forced this." "You forged my signature," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "You gave yourself control over my life. You wouldn't have survived without me." He shot back. "You were drowning after Daniel died. You couldn't handle it." The words hit deep, but the anger burning in his voice told me this wasn't about concern. It was resentment. Years of it. Outside. Tires screeched against pavement. Police vehicles flooded into the parking lot, blocking exits from both directions. Doors slammed open as officers spilled out, voices rising in sharp commands that echoed across the lot. The SUV lunged forward, attempting to escape, but a police cruiser cut it off instantly, forcing it to halt. The entire diner fell silent. Customers turned toward the windows, confusion spreading through the room as flashing lights painted red and blue streaks across the walls. Lucas stared toward the chaos outside, his face draining of color. "They weren't supposed to get here this fast," he muttered under his breath. That single sentence confirmed everything. Not suspicion. Not theory. Truth. "You planned this," I said quietly. He turned back toward me, his expression collapsing into something desperate. "You don't understand," he said. "You don't understand what that inheritance meant." His voice cracked slightly, emotion pushing through his anger. "That money should have been ours," he continued. "Family money, not yours alone." There it was. The truth beneath everything. Jealousy, entitlement, bitterness that had been building long before that knock at my door. My phone rang suddenly, breaking the tension. "Attorney." I answered immediately. "Yes," I said, my voice tight. "We activated the emergency freeze," he said quickly. "The transfer has been blocked." Relief surged through me so fast it almost hurt. "It stopped?" I asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "And we traced the authorization request. It originated from Lucas's registered credentials." I lifted my eyes slowly to Lucas as the words sank in. Digital evidence. Permanent. Irrefutable. Outside, police officers stormed toward the diner entrance. The door burst open, and the room filled with sharp commands. "Everyone stay where you are." Customers froze instantly. Hands raised slightly in confusion. 2 officers moved directly toward Lucas. He stood frozen, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. "You are under investigation for fraud and conspiracy," one officer said firmly. Lucas laughed once, a short, hollow sound that didn't match the chaos unfolding around him. "You don't get it," he said quietly, turning back toward me. Not angry, not shouting, just hollow. "You were never supposed to keep it," he said. The words hit harder than anything else he'd said all morning. Not supposed to keep it. As if everything I had inherited, everything Daniel and I had planned, had never belonged to me in his mind. The officers stepped forward, gripping his arms firmly. Lucas didn't fight, didn't resist. But as they led him past me, he turned his head one final time. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I didn't see my brother. Not the boy who had ridden bikes beside me down dusty roads. Not the man who comforted me at Daniel's funeral. I saw someone else entirely. Someone capable of watching me lose everything without hesitation. Outside, the flashing lights continued to flood the parking lot as officers escorted Lucas toward the patrol car. The SUV driver had already been forced to the ground nearby, hands restrained behind his back. The entire scene unfolded like something distant, unreal. An officer approached me slowly, his expression calmer than the chaos around us. "Ma'am," he said gently, "you did the right thing calling this in." I nodded faintly, unable to speak. He glanced toward the patrol car where Lucas now sat inside, head lowered. "You were closer to losing everything than you realize," he added quietly. The weight of his words settled into my chest like stone. Because he was right. If I had opened that door, if I had trusted the wrong person, everything would have been gone. As the patrol car door slammed shut and the sirens softened into the distance, a heavy truth settled inside me. That morning didn't just stop a crime. It ended the family I thought I still had. I watched the patrol car door close, the sound echoing louder in my chest than it did across the parking lot. Lucas didn't look at me again. Not as the officer guided him into the back seat. Not as the door slammed shut. Not as the flashing lights reflected across the diner windows like broken pieces of something that could never be put back together. For a long moment, I stood there, unable to move. The chaos around me slowly faded into background noise, voices, footsteps, radios crackling, but inside my head, everything felt quiet. Too quiet. Not relief. Not victory. Just exhaustion. The kind that settles deep into your bones after fear finally loosens its grip. Outside, officers continued moving quickly, securing the area. The dark SUV sat crooked near the edge of the lot, blocked from every direction. Another man stood beside it, hands restrained, head lowered. More people involved. More betrayal than I had ever imagined. An officer approached me gently. "Ma'am, are you okay to drive?" he asked. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure if it was true. "I think so," I said. He studied my face for a moment before giving a small nod. "Your property is secure," he added quietly. The transfer attempt was blocked. "You did everything right. Everything right?" Those words settled somewhere deep inside me. But they didn't feel triumphant. They felt heavy. Because doing everything right still meant losing something I could never get back. I stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sunlight felt warmer now, brighter than it had earlier. But my chest still felt tight. As I drove home, the road looked different. Familiar houses, neatly trimmed lawns, neighbors starting their morning routines. Everything appeared normal again. But I wasn't the same person who had driven those streets yesterday. When I turned onto my block, I noticed 2 police vehicles still parked near my house. Their presence should have made me nervous, but instead, it made me feel strangely safe, protected, watched over. I pulled into my driveway slowly and stepped out of the car, pausing for a moment before walking toward my front door. The chalk mark was still there, faint now in the morning light, waiting. I stared at it for several seconds before unlocking the door and stepping inside. The house felt quiet, not threatening, just still. almost unfamiliar. I set my bag down and walked slowly into the living room, lowering myself into the chair where I had sat just hours earlier. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. My mind drifted backward, pulling me into memories I hadn't expected to revisit. Lucas and I as children, riding bikes down cracked sidewalks, laughing until our stomachs hurt, sharing secrets we swore never to tell anyone else. He used to stand in front of me when other kids picked fights, used to protect me, used to make me feel safe. That memory hurt more than anything that had happened this morning. Because betrayal from strangers is frightening, but betrayal from family, that breaks something deeper, something harder to repair. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket that felt both comforting and suffocating. Eventually, I stood and walked back toward the front door. The chalk mark waited exactly where I had left it. I knelt slowly, pressing my fingers lightly against the cool surface of the wood. This mark had meant danger, selection, targeting, but now it meant something else. Survival. I stood and walked to the kitchen, grabbing a damp cloth from the sink. When I returned, I pressed it firmly against the chalk lines. They didn't disappear immediately. The mark smeared slightly at first, stubborn against the cloth. It took several steady wipes before the lines began to fade, slowly, piece by piece, like fear leaving the body one breath at a time. When the last trace finally disappeared, I leaned back slightly and exhaled. Not relief. Not yet. But strength? A quiet, steady strength that hadn't been there before. My phone rang behind me, breaking the silence. I turned and answered quickly. My attorney's voice came through, calm and steady. "It's finished," he said. "The freeze is active. All assets secured. No further attempts can be made without your direct approval." I closed my eyes briefly, letting the words settle. "And Lucas?" I asked quietly. "He's been formally charged," he replied. "Fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Justice. Not revenge. Justice." That word felt different, heavier, final. After the call ended, I walked slowly toward the front window. The sun had risen fully now, spilling golden light across the street outside. The same street that had felt threatening hours earlier now looked peaceful again. Ordinary. Safe. For the first time since 3 a.m, my breathing felt steady. Not shallow. Not rushed. Just calm. I rested my hand against the window frame and stared out at the quiet neighborhood. The truth settled inside me slowly. Danger doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it sounds like a voice you've trusted your entire life. But survival comes from listening to the right warning at the right moment. If Mr. Dawson hadn't knocked, if I had opened that door, if I had ignored that uneasy feeling deep in my chest, everything I owned, everything Daniel left behind, would have vanished before sunrise. And maybe my life would have followed. That thought lingered as I stood there in the sunlight, letting the warmth reach places inside me that fear had frozen. What I understood that morning wasn't just about crime. It was about instinct, about boundaries, about learning that trust is powerful, but awareness is survival. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to open the door. If you've ever had a moment where something inside you whispered that something wasn't right, I hope you listened. And if you didn't, I hope this story reminds you that it's never too late to start trusting your instincts. Have you ever ignored a warning you later wished you had followed? Or trusted someone you never thought could betray you? If this story made you think about your own safety, your own boundaries, or the people you allow into your life, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Stories like this matter, because sometimes sharing what happened might protect someone else from walking into the same danger. So if this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, or reminded you how important it is to stay alert, stay aware, and stay strong, stay here with me. There are more stories to tell, more lessons to share, and sometimes the next story you hear might be the one that saves you. That morning, I locked my door one last time, stepping back into the quiet of my home. But for the first time since the knock at 3 in the morning, I finally felt safe inside my own life again.